Yo, what up, Toshi here. So it's been a while since we talked about Firefly. Now I wanted to actually make a what happened to Firefly video or a story of Firefly, just like I've done for previous characters, but I'm on a bit of a time crunch if I'm being honest, and I need to get this video out ASAP. So I literally just finished and uploaded the previous video you maybe have watched. So this video is coming right after because of the time crunch. I'm just going to go off the dome, everything about Firefly starting from when she released to where she is currently in the state of Honkai Star Rail. This video is sponsored by Lootbar. I was able to save on Stellar Jades with the cheaper prices they have compared to the typical in-game top-up version. The process is very safe and simple as it takes cheapest conversion currency rate and then presents to you many discounted prices, which you can then use with various coupons to save on an even more amount of Stellar Jades. The transaction is smooth and simple. Enter your UID in the top right corner. Once you choose your preferred method of payment, you will within a matter of moments receive your purchased on-Neric shards, which you can then convert to Stellar Jades. One thing I like about Lootbar is that you get the first time top-up bonus for your Stellar Jades, which is a massive help when it comes to making the videos, because that means more pools for the rate-up character. Check out the link in the description to save on your Stellar Jade purchases, and thanks again to Lootbar for sponsoring this video. Firefly was a very interesting character because this character has been a part of an archetype that was originally very weak. It was actually so weak to the point where this archetype would only work once it did receive direct buffs in the form of Superbreak. As you may know or maybe not know, Break Effect was the worst stat you could have on your characters in Honkai Star Rail just from the get-go, because Break Effect leading into the launch of the game was heavily nerfed. Now Break Effect was really good in the beta testing phase of Honkai Star Rail because Break Effect would allow you to dish out a ton more damage than having any other stat on your character in the early game, because maybe you don't know, maybe you do know, but Break Effect scales way harder initially than any other stat, but later on as the game does scale, that damage would be a lot less than a crit essential or maybe a non-crit build, right? If you're doing like a dot team, for instance. And so when Honkai Star Rail did release, they'd heavily nerfed Break Effect to compensate for the fact that these break teams were dealing a lot more damage. Susheng specifically was doing a lot more damage than your typical DPS build. And so that's when the Susheng went from being a Break Effect Susheng, right, a hybrid Break Effect Susheng, to just being a straight up crit damage dealer. But we all know the state of Susheng. Maybe I should make a video on that character because she does have her own history, which is actually kind of interesting, right? Break Effect was non-existent until the release of Sorrowwolf, and then Sorrowwolf made Break Effect come back online for a bit with her Break Effect oriented build. And the reason why Break Effect was really good on Sorrowwolf was because Sorrowwolf was one of the few characters that could build Break Effect and her stat line, make value or get value from having Break Effect in her stat line, because she was able to put the weakness onto the enemy, right? So if she was able to put the quantum weakness on enemy, she was able to also break that toughness of the enemy, because Sorrowwolf was one of the few characters that got her ult many times during a cycle and was also able to do a lot of toughness because of her attacks. This was pre-buff. Now post-buff, if I'm not mistaken, they did nerf the values of the toughness reduction on her ultimate. Pre-change, right, pre-buff, the toughness break on her ultimate did a lot more, and this was in Honkai Star Rail 1.1. Now because Sorrowwolf was one of the few characters where all she needed as a Break Effect bot was speed, effect hit rate, and Break Effect. Once you reach the stat threshold you needed for the effect hit rate to land her debuffs, then you would go Break Effect on the character, and this would maximize your DPS as a Sorrowwolf as a free-to-play if you were someone who was not investing to the Sorrowwolf further via Eidolons and Signature Light Cone, because those things would go towards the character then being a crit-based sub-damage dealer, which is pretty much what she works as now. But understand that back before her buffs, right, so pre-buff Sorrowwolf, putting stats into her speed, crit rate, crit damage, attack, because you cannot make value or use out of your crit rate and crit damage if your attack is low, right? This is the whole reason why Sorrowwolf ended up getting attack percentage inside of her buffs, right, depending on her effective rate, because she's now able to take advantage of crit and crit damage So now she has free stat allocation for attack, right? Back then, she didn't have the allocation to her attack when she built effect hit rate. So trying to put crit rate damage, attack percent, effect hit rate, and speed on the character was virtually impossible unless you ended up getting her Central Light Cone and had other characters in the team providing crit rate, like Fujuan, for instance, right? So you needed external sources of crit stats. But anyways, beside the point here, we can make a whole different video on Silverwolf's history herself, because again, just like Su Xing, she also does have a history to go along with her. Kafka was a very interesting character upon her release in 1.2, because it was thought that Kafka could be a break effect character, or a character that could make use of break effect, and this will become a little bit more apparent with the release of Ruan Mei. But the reason why is because if the character does have break effect, not only do you deal more damage upon the initial weakness break of the enemy, right? But the placement or the effect you get from breaking the weakness of the enemy, which again in Honkai Star right now is not prevalent, but do understand that early Honkai Star, breaking the enemy's toughness was very important, right? Because you got effects to go along with breaking the toughness of the enemy. But nowadays, it doesn't really matter. Look, I can't even find where it is in the game because it doesn't matter nowadays, right? Breaking the toughness of the enemy is so irrelevant. It just does not matter anymore. Here, if I can find it, combat types. When you would break the toughness of the enemy with character like Kafka, you would put a lightning dot on the enemy. Now, the lightning dot that you would place onto the enemy after breaking their weakness would actually scale with the amount of break effect you had on the character, which if you are a new age Honkai Star player, you might not know this. But this was very valuable on Kafka back in the day, and having some break effect, not even just building into break effect or rolling into break effect in your substats, having some break effect would allow you to dish out more damage when you did break the toughness of the enemy, which helped with her overall dot damage. So for Kafka, having some break effect, not much, but having some break effect was nice on the character. And this is the whole reason why Fermata was a light cone that existed and could be utilized on Kafka back in the day, because the break effect you got from this light cone would help with the weakness broken dot effect you would place into the enemy. But this is super outdated because enemies now, and even leading into 2.0, would have a lot more HP. So then you would just focus on just her organic dots, which was the dots she would have with her ultimate and her talent, if I'm not mistaken. This is pre-buff. Kafka is a little bit of a confusing character for me sometimes. So the only real break effect characters we could make use of was Silverwolf in 1.1, and maybe sometimes Kafka in 1.2, although you didn't really want to build break effect on the character if you could help it. And then leading into the release of Ruan Mei in 1.6, would make break effect essentially a stat that was actually not troll to build on your characters, because Ruan Mei was the first character to actually give break effect to characters for free. Now, with her being the real main character to scale for break effect, you would get a lot of value with the more break effect you have on this character, giving more stats to your team overall in terms of damage percentage, but also would help scale Ruan Mei's damage in general with the extra break effect you would have on this character. Now, the damage she does deal doesn't matter nowadays because the enemies have so much HP, but do understand that at 1.6, the enemies did not have that much, like not even a third of the HP they have now. So the break damage you would deal from Ruan Mei was actually a lot more valuable in the overall team damage setting. And this is where the team damage oriented damage comes into play when we talk about teams like, for instance, break effect, Superbreak, which we'll get into in a moment, and dot teams. Now, the only way the break effect playstyle would work is with the addition of Superbreak and Ruan Mei. Ruan Mei especially, and the reason why Ruan Mei was essential to the break effect playstyle is because she would delay the action of the enemies after they were weakness broken, which meant that characters like Firefly would then get more damage in the fight against those enemies that are weakness broken without having to constantly weakness break those enemies over and over and over again. So then you would have more damage uptime on this character, especially considering how fast this character would move. The Harmony MC is very important because the Harmony MC essentially gives Superbreak to anyone on your team. So anyone on your team can do Superbreak damage, and that's what makes the Harmony MC very valuable. Nowadays, the Harmony MC is, of course, just locked to the Superbreak teams, and Superbreak would be very, very valuable with this character if you were using this character with any other character that did not have any sort of break effect playstyle. So for instance, any character that was not Firefly. That's where the value of the Harmony MC came online. And Harmony MC was actually one of the, or probably the first MC we would have, or version of the MC, that was actually a lot valuable and crucial to a team composition. We had the Preservation MC, and the Preservation MC was good for the Swarm Disaster type of content, but that was it. And maybe there was maybe 1 to 2 MOCs during the year where the Preservation MC could be actually used as your defensive option. But of course, that was far few in between. Firefly's release in 2.2 would shake up the meta in a drastic way, because Superbreak was a team composition that was, for one, extremely easy to build, very front-loaded damage. The team was extremely consistent and auto-friendly, which all of those things would add up to make the team the best team you could play all around. And Firefly would be one of the few characters that would be meta in Honkai Star for a very long time, despite her being a blast-eccentric character. She would be good in all of the contents pre-Apocalyptic Shadow, and even after Apocalyptic Shadow's release, she would be even better. In Apocalyptic Shadow, you want to break the weakness of the enemy, and this is where the Superbreak teams come into play even more, and this is the content that is designed for characters like that. Firefly would be one of the few characters that would make that content a joke because of how often the character attacks and makes value of Ruan Mei's extra toughness break that she does give to the team. When Acheron was released in 2.1, Boothill was in 2.2, and Firefly was in 2.3, which, again, a character that was good in blast scenarios in the Superbreak team would quite literally overshadow a character that was only good in single target scenarios, while being the best character in single target scenarios, don't get me wrong, but was a part of the same Superbreak archetype as Firefly. And this is not even taken into consideration Firefly's purpose in the story, how popular the character is. This is just from a meta perspective. And while Firefly was beginning to actually start to fall off in Honkai Star, this would lead into the release of Rappa. And the reason why Rappa ended up being a character that stayed a lot longer in the meta as a Superbreak character was thanks to the fact that not only the contents did shield for her with having a lot of imaginary weaknesses, but you also had to take into consideration that Rappa just made good use of what Honkai Star was leading into at the point of her arrival. When we take a look at characters that released in 3.0, like for instance Herta, Aglaya, right? Rappa was an AoE character. And AoE was extremely important in Honkai Star post 3.0, right? And even leading into 3.0. Firefly is just not as good in AoE situations, and the reason why is this character can only hit 3 enemies at once. Also, we gotta take into consideration, Firefly has not received any other characters that would boost her performance in her team comps. Fugue was a character that made Rappa way better because of the exo toughness mechanic that Rappa would get from Fugue. And Fugue was also helping a character like Rappa that did not implant weakness onto the enemy. So if the enemies did not have imaginary weakness, your toughness break on the enemy would fall off. So that's where the value of Fugue came into play. So Fugue wasn't really that much of a help to the character. But we had Linksha, and Linksha was the character that ended up doing a lot more in Firefly's team than Firefly did. And when I say that, I mean in AoE situations. But this is even more apparent when you take into consideration there were some times in content where you would actually want to use Linksha, and I kid you not, with a character like Sunday, because Sunday would essentially give Linksha more turns with her summon, and you would deal a lot more damage over the course of the fight than you would with Firefly in her best team. And that's not knocking Firefly as a character, it's just saying that Linksha is a character that does way too much damage for essentially being a healer. Firefly would hit her ceiling, and hit her ceiling relatively early within her release date. Her best team, her best relic sets, her best meta, she would get on her release. And after that point, she would only just fall off more and more as the years go on. And Firefly as right now is just not as good of a character as she once was. It's not to say that they couldn't directly buff the character like they've done other characters. I actually expected her to receive buffs alongside her skin. A little confusing to me. The skin looks great, by the way. I love this skin. If they can give this skin to every character with a quantum element, that's the state of Firefly, and that is the history of Firefly. There's really nothing else more I could say about the character Because for Firefly, Fugue didn't help her as much as Fugue helped Rappa and even Boot Hill. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and have a nice rest of your day. Thanks again to Lootbar for sponsoring this video. I do apologize that this video is not the same typical fashion as the other historical analysis videos I normally do. I'll try to make this video as comforting as possible as I do with the other ones though. Bye-bye.